Welcome back to Inside City Hall. Last month, Mayor de Blasio announced the creation of our city's official identification card that would allow undocumented immigrants to get better access to municipal services. There are critics of the program, but the administration is trying to figure out how to get all New Yorkers interested in the card. One of the ways it's doing that is by turning to the biggest cultural institutions for help, and we are using that as an excuse to talk about some larger issues as far as the arts are concerned. And so joining us to do that, we've got Queens City Councilman Jimmy Van Bramer, who is the chairman of the council's Cultural Affairs Committee. Klaus Biesenbach is the director of MoMA PS1. Scott Medbury is the president of the Brooklyn Botanic Gardens, and Andrea Louis is the executive director of the Asian American Arts Alliance. Thank you all for being here. Good to see you. And I want to start by, I guess, laying out some of the new things that are happening, because it's not as if the money's been doubled or tripled or even substantially increased, but you guys are planning to use it in different ways, how the city provides funding for the arts. Let's take a look at some of the initiatives. The municipal ID cards that I mentioned, free access to members of the cultural institutions group, that tends to be the larger cultural institutions, $23 million in new arts money, including 120 new arts teachers, which is extremely important. There's a cultural immigrant initiative, we're going to hear more about that in a minute, to expand cultural programming. There's also cultural plan legislation, the creation of a comprehensive cultural plan for our city. And that sounds very promising as well. Want to hear more about that. And there are after-school adventures initiative. This is an additional $7 million for after-school culture and arts programs, and a focus on building culture within communities, what they are calling naturally occurring cultural districts. And so, Jimmy Van Bramer,
yes.
Let's start with what all of this means. I mean, because a lot of this, as I said, is not new money or anything like that, but it's going to be sort of reorganized in a different way. What is the goal for the city?
I think the overarching goal is expanding access to the arts and making sure that we have a 5-borough strategy so that our funding, our government funding for the arts, is reaching every single neighborhood. There should be no child in any neighborhood in any of the 5 boroughs that doesn't have access to the arts. Obviously, the easiest and best way to get there is through increasing funding for arts and education. That's why you see that impressive $23 million allocation for arts and ed, which includes the hiring of new arts teachers, but also includes partnerships between schools and culturals throughout the city of New York. I think all of the initiatives that you just outlined are part of this very aggressive strategy on the part of the administration and on the city council and in our committee to make sure that arts is everywhere, and that's what we're aiming at.
Well, one question, and I had the same question for some city officials not that long ago, is that there are already requirements that all, especially in the lower grades, all students get a certain amount of performance arts and visual arts and music education and so forth, but in a lot of cases it's just not being done, right?
That's right. I think sadly there were a number of places where compliance was not happening. I think now we have a chancellor who is very, very interested in the arts and education and who is aggressively seeking to infuse the system with the arts. That includes teachers, that includes classrooms that are dedicated to the arts, music, dance, making sure that all of those things are in our schools. And so that's why this moment is very exciting, because all of us in one voice are saying that the arts are too important to not be everywhere.
And now, Andrea Louis, I mean, this is in some ways an important business proposition for cultural institutions, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
You want to grow the customers and the patrons of the future, right?
Absolutely. And really what our organization does is we really help to promote the cultural workforce of Asian descent here in New York City. Mm-hmm. So to the extent that we can help build those bridges between artists and other sectors, we're really happy to do that.
I mean,
and
when you say workforce, I mean, this is a big part of the economy.
That's right. All the really bright and talented young people who come to New York City to build their careers. We really look forward to working with the mayor to really make it possible for them to live and work here.
Mm-hmm. And now, Scott, when we say, and we have mapped it in the past, where there are areas where there just isn't a lot of attention to the arts and so forth, do you see that? I mean, a lot of I know you have schools and classes coming through there all the time.
Sure.
Do you have any sense that there are some neighborhoods that don't make it to the garden?
Maybe in the schools, and sort of environmental education is a big thrust of ours, so we really prioritize Title I schools in sort of the least advantaged neighborhoods. We also do a lot of community gardening work, and so we try to be in every council district throughout the borough and in Manhattan somewhat as well. So not so much. I mean, I think community gardening has really caught on in just every neighborhood in New York.
Mm-hmm. And now, Hans, there's been this kind of conversation going on for years that the previous mayor, Mike Bloomberg, personally funded lots of cultural institutions and that there was going to be a gap when he left. What are you hearing? Is that true? Is that relevant as far as you can tell?
It's not true from what I hear, because being the director of an institution that is in Queens, in Long Island City, MoMA PS1. MoMA PS1 is part of the Museum of Modern Art, so part of the larger museum. And we are in a very up-and-coming neighborhood in Long Island City, but we're reaching out to the more vulnerable parts of Queens, and we have been getting enough support to do this, to continue doing this. So that's actually a very positive component.
And you mentioned Long Island City. I imagine that is one of what you're calling naturally occurring cultural districts. But I mean, we toured the area. You showed me around there. There are a lot of people working very hard to make that district work, right? I mean, what's natural about these places?
Well, I think that we see all over the city artists coming to a place and recognizing that it has value for them. They create their work. That in turn brings more artists, and in turn brings more people to the area. It becomes very attractive. But there needs to be planning, and there also needs to be a discussion about art not operating in silos, but in fact being a part of every part of a neighborhood. So that includes housing, and that includes workforce development, that includes all of the things that everybody needs, including artists. So I think we see these naturally occurring cultural districts happening in Brooklyn and Queens, in every borough, but making sure that there are services that go along with that, that allow artists to remain in the places that they created and made so attractive in the first place, because what we often see happen is artists find an area, create work, create a home. It becomes very desirable, and ultimately they become priced out.
Well, this is something that happens quite a lot. I mean, we could name the neighborhoods, right? Yep. From Greenpoint, Williamsburg, to the Lower East Side, to Chelsea, where we are right now. Is the idea? I mean, you don't want to stop that, though, right? I mean, you want people to find underused neighborhoods or areas where there's opportunity, and to start making art and start making some commerce come out of it too. But how do you balance that against sort of making sure that there's a neighborhood there once they're done with all of this?
Absolutely, and I think that working closely with all areas of the city to really partner the folks who work in the arts with artists with that economic development is really critical to make sure all those voices are heard, especially where there are also immigrant communities as well.
We'll talk a little bit about that. There's this immigrant initiative, and the notion of bringing culture to immigrants actually strikes one as somewhat jarring, because the one thing people are bringing when they come from another country is a whole set of, sort of, whether it's culinary or, artistic or musical sort of sensibilities. Why a special program?
Bringing the culture, absolutely, but actually making sure that art is being funded and being supported is another thing altogether. When we talk about increasing access and increasing the franchise, that means our emerging and immigrant communities need to have access to funding, and too often those communities are felt that they're left out of that. So I created this Cultural Immigrant Initiative, which for this first year is a new $1.5 million that will go towards organizations that are serving immigrant communities, that are infused with culture from other countries, and doing their work in New York City. So I think it's about making sure that those organizations who are already doing great work, who already have these great cultural events, but too often they're not being supported through government funding like other arts organizations. We want to build those organizations, bring them to greater capacity, greater audiences, so that art is being appreciated, and it's high time that we have a dedicated initiative to make sure that those groups are being appreciated.
We're down to our last few minutes, and because the theme is outreach and connectivity,
sure.
Tell us a little bit about what's going on at the Brooklyn Gardens.
Well, we're doing all kinds of things and continue to do so, but one thing, building on the council member's point, is really engendering ownership in the garden and other large cultural institutions in newcomers to New York. And so one of the ways that we discover is that young people are the ones that bring their parents, their families back to the garden. So we have a lot of initiatives to help them come back and introduce their families there. We've got lots of things going on in the community garden sector, as I mentioned. Certainly in the schools, we've got an environmental high school, a middle school leadership program. It's very exciting. Over 150 days with free hours. So just getting that word out there and getting people to come. Our visitation is way up and continues to go so.
Okay, Andrea.
That's terrific. Well, the Asian American Arts Alliance is an art service organization, so we support individual artists as well as small arts groups. And to the extent that we're going to be helping the immigrant community, we're piloting something we're calling Town Hall Local, where we're actually bringing our flagship program, Town Hall, into an immigrant community. In this case, in November, we'll be in Flushing, and this initiative is supported by Councilmember Koo there. And we're really excited to be working with various social service agencies and arts communities right in Flushing to just bring the arts to a greater awareness for everyone.
Yeah, after the Hurricane Sandy, we opened the museum in Long Island City just as a cultural relief center because it was needed and we had electricity. Everything functioned, of course. But then we realized not every area is as privileged, and we built a relief center, cultural center out in the Rockaways, in Rockaway Beach. And that was such a huge dialogue with the local communities. There's a Rockaway Artist Alliance, hundreds of artists based there in the Rockaways. They did educational programs. And we could continue this summer, and we had, fortunately, Patti Smith, who is also local in the Rockaways. She gave a free concert, which was absolutely stunning. It was like Woodstock. And she, as the artist, Patti Smith, she did a great exhibition, which is a huge success there. So it's an outreach to people who wouldn't otherwise come to an art show. And she had the integrating name and integrating generosity to really invite everybody around there.
Okay, that is going to be the last word. Klaus Biesenbach, thank you for coming in. Jimmy Van Bramer, always good to see you. Andrea, thanks for coming in, and Scott as well. We are going to take a short break now. When we come back, Texas Governor Rick Perry is trudging on despite being indicted on abuse of power charges. We're going to talk about that case with political reporter Karina Kling, who's been covering the story for Time Warner Cable News Austin. Also tonight, was Governor Cuomo's trip to Israel an effective distraction from the Moreland Commission controversy? We'll talk it over with 4 top consultants in just a minute. Stay with us.